right. Thank you for being here. Ayush Prakash, writer, podcaster, thinker that covers a lot of things. What do you think the purpose of human existence here in this reality is?
It's a deep question. I think it's different for everybody. Human existence, well, you have to define human, you have to define existence, and then you have to define reality. For my generation, I think Gen Z, our existence is predicated on technology. We're so-called digital natives. And so what it means to be human is a little different than the baby boomers or the millennials because we grew up in technology. We had access to the internet, to YouTube, to a smartphone, to a laptop, in some cases to an Alexa within arm's reach from when we were very young. Whereas baby boomers or the millennials, for example, they adopted these technologies when they were already fully formed adults, basically after 25 years of age. And so for Gen Z, when we're looking at existence and reality, our reality is bifurcated between the physical and the cyber realms. Whereas other generations, they're just looking at physical reality and then using cyberspace as a little portal. Um, so human existence in the context of Gen Z is very strange. We've grown up with informational noise, just this whirlwind of constant streaming services, constant noise, constant like mental pollution. And so I think we have to really start asking ourselves, is this number one healthy? Is this necessary? And then number three, and I think most importantly or crucially, is where does this go? Where does this end up? Is this just a runaway train? Or are there ways to slow it down, maybe think about what our next step should be?
So then what's the point of life?
Hmm. Again, if you're coming at it from, I think that there are two angles you can come at this from: technology or religion. If you're coming at it from a religious angle, then the point of life is just God. What that means to you, I think, is slightly different for everybody else. I think the God you believe in as a Hindu is different from the God you believe in as a Jewish person is different from a Muslim, is different from a Christian, etc., etc. And you can exhaust all the religions. They each have a certain kind of gradient of belief. But if you look at it from the context of, or through the lens of technology, I think it's interesting because the point of life is to continually get better, or to the telos of technology in a sense is better, faster, cheaper. So the point of life in the through the lens of technology would be to increasingly get more things from less things or something out of nothing. And I think, fortunately or not, that is what humans are slowly molding our civilization towards, which is we first went from the steam train to now bullet trains. We have increased exponentially how fast we can travel. Then we went to planes. Now we're probably going towards supersonic jets that cut through the stratosphere for the purpose of speed. In terms of information, we went from encyclopedias to the internet, which was like this massive jump of, instead of having some physical finite medium, now you have this infinite substrate, digital substrate. And then now you pair on top of that artificial intelligence like ChatGPT, and now you have, for better or for worse, you can just type in a question and have it answer for you. So you collapse the proximity via the negation of critical thinking. So the point of life, I think, changes depending on the lens that you look at it from. But I do think that in order to function in a healthy manner, you do have to be able to contend with every lens by itself and also simultaneously. I don't think if you're looking at it just through the lens of technology or just through the lens of religion, I don't think those are healthy things to do. I think one of the things that we're seeing, the polarization in the world, is that people think that their lens is objective reality rather than just their subjective viewpoint.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's that individual perspective. So I like the way Joe Rogan talks about it, where he says we're just the sex organs for the computer world. and that we're like the caterpillar that's building a cocoon, and we don't even know that we're going to turn into a butterfly. Or yeah, you can take that comparison as far as you want, but the idea that we're here to give birth to the computer intelligence. And then the religious side of it, I think if you look at religion, I think you can always use, this might just be my perspective. Of course, I know it's just my perspective, is that you can always answer the question with, because that's what God wanted, or that's what God did. So even if you get to the most extreme technology, it can still, the answer is, yeah, God did that. Because if God created us and we created it, then I, I guess you could say God let it happen, or knew it was going to happen, if you're talking about an omniscient, creator. So then that would make me wonder what the computer looks at people like. Does the computer see, how does a computer mind deal with humanity and the drives of humanity? Certainly it would be different, because you're not worried about the things you're worried about when you're human. You have a longer lifespan. You still have viruses and things, so you're worried about that. There is that whole idea of remaining alive, whatever a computer considers alive. I mean, there is a being and then there is not being. Is there a better name for artificial intelligence than artificial intelligence? Like, what would a computer call itself?
I think we're coming at it from a lot of threads. So I just want to disentangle it just to make the conversation more linear. But I think it's an interesting question. But just if I can build on it, or build to it rather. So number one is that when we're thinking about computers coming alive, that's not necessarily the way that ChatGPT or anything works. So that's not like a major worry right now. I know that people see ChatGPT and this rise of AI, and they think in a couple of years or in a handful of decades, this thing is going to turn sentient slash conscious. People use those terms interchangeably, which I think is irresponsible. But no, these systems, these computers, are trained on this massive collection of data found across the internet. That's a separate issue. And all it's doing, it's called sequence prediction. It's basically saying, you and I can do sequence prediction right now, to be or not. Most people will finish the sentence to be, right? That we're just predicting it. Obviously, that's prediction in a different way. But for a computer, it's basically collecting all this text and saying, oh, to be always comes after to be or not. And so it's giving you that. Now, the interesting and, in my mind, the sinister thing that's happened is that we've looked at these systems, even though we know precisely how it functions, and ascribed what's called theory of mind to it. So humans have this ability to look at other humans, look at intelligence, and I put it in air quotes because the way that we describe intelligence now is different from the way that we used to ascribe intelligence or describe intelligence. We look at this text, which is, kudos to OpenAI and Claude and all of these Anthropic, Mistral, Google, all of these AI companies, because it's a marvel of engineering, a great feat of engineering. But we look at the text and we say, oh, that looks like it's written by a human. So it must be intelligent in the way I'm intelligent. And the way I'm intelligent is I have sentience and consciousness. So now we think AI is sentient and conscious. Whereas in fact, it's just mimicry. It's instead of biomimicry, where maybe a moth might evolve to have these defensive mechanisms to mimic the way a bird looks to attract the bird and then eat it, something like that. It's many examples of biomimicry in nature. We now have this thing called technomimicry, where we're seeing technology kind of mimic humans and fool us, and we see it fooling us in a variety of ways. And again, it's like the core problem is sinister, and the ramifications are also even more sinister, where chatbots like Replica are now replacing human partners, where 40%, I think a survey did, 40% of Replica's users already are in relationships or even married. And so we're seeing how artificial intelligence, again, it's not alive in the way that we are. It's not organic, but we're already seeing the silicon intelligence, if we were to use that term loosely, already invade our social lives. So I don't think that we need to worry about, the Terminator Skynet fiasco. Obviously, it's fun to talk about and speculate, and I think these conversations, if we stay grounded, are really interesting and important. If we do think about robots acquiring sentience or consciousness, thinking about the type of laws that we should have, how those laws would be affected right now, the conversation then transcends into animal consciousness, animal sentience, which I think are really interesting conversations as well. But if we were just to stay on the topic of AI, I don't think AI needs to be conscious to be dangerous. I think we're already seeing right now deep fakes, for example. And I apologize to your listeners because this is a very difficult thing to hear and even talk about, but a lot of children are becoming really endangered um, through AI deep fakes. The sinister actors are making not safe for work content out of children, and it's causing like parents don't want to post their children online. In some cases, and I think I have it right here. In New Jersey, there was a high school where kids were threatening male kids were threatening the female kids with AI generated topless photos of them. In other cases, we're seeing grown men target teenage girls and send them topless photos of themselves to say, if you don't send me the real ones, I'm going to post this all over. Right? We think of autonomous weapons, and it's like, yeah, before they weren't really worrisome, but now with the rise of LLMs, large vision language models, even, it's like, yeah, now we have to start worrying about these in drones, in tanks, in helicopters, in submarines, in missiles, especially with the political climate, the political heat that's going on in the world right now. Yeah, I think these are the conversations we need to start having. It's like, yeah, artificial intelligence has really democratized access to a lot of things around the world, and that's a net positive. But there are also a lot of things that maybe if we just sat down and had a conversation about, we would come to the conclusion of this isn't really benefiting our civilization. Maybe we, not to regulate it. I'm not a Luddite. I don't think that this halting AI development does anything. But I do think that we should have more grounded conversations, not just the elites or the experts in AI, because I say that tongue in cheek. I think that Gen Z and Gen Alpha should also be part of the conversation. I think that millennials and baby boomers should also be part of the conversation. And we should establish cross generational frameworks to figure out, what the hell is this technology doing? Why is it doing this to us? What can we do as a result? And, you know, fundamentally, is this benefiting society or not? I think a large proportion of people, when you look at the objective landscape of AI, would come to the conclusion that it's really not benefiting society at large.
How do computers learn differently than people?
Well, you have to think about what you mean by learn. So again, it's just the training data that it has. Um, so this is the problem of AI bias, where we have a large sample of the training data in most AI systems. The demographics are, I think, Western, middle-aged, white males. And so when you're thinking of healthcare, when you're thinking of autonomous vehicles, it's like, would an AI recognize me, for example, as, maybe the melanin in my skin is um, more or less. Would an AI recognize an African American female, for example, because she's not in the training set, so it wouldn't literally recognize her as a person, or the error rate might be much higher. And so this is kind of where we're not, like, the computer systems aren't learning the way we do. But we are, and I use this term loosely, but we are teaching it a lot of biases, and this is not purposefully in the forced way of like these programmers at OpenAI or something are doing this purposefully. This is just a product of the internet. This is just like a kind of side effect that happens when you're training with this amount of data, high quality data.
I mean, how's that different than a person learns though? It's the same way a person learns biases and learns anything they learn. Like if you think about school, it's just a faster version of it where a computer is learning it and has so much more information it's taking in. It reminds me of I think it was a Twilight Zone show or something like that, where a guy is abducted by aliens and then he's able to retain so much information. So he's reading a lot of books, he's tuned into radio stations, and it sounds like babble to everybody, but he's just taking all this information in. And then the aliens come back and download his mind because they're just collecting the information. And then he's back to normal. So I could see how a computer or whatever it is, whatever system you're putting this information into has a hard time sorting it out. As far as bias, I think if you take sets of internet searches and things like that, just in the curation of it, the way Google does and other places do, other different search engines curate things different ways, that when you are training an AI on information like that, that the bias is already built in. And to say that it's white male middle age, I doubt that's the case. I think the bias is all over the place and it just depends on what source you're going to. But that's, I mean, it's like you could put a search in on Bing and Google and you're going to get different things. And some of the other ones that say they don't curate it as much, you're going to get different things. So if you have an AI that's trained on each of those, they're going to be like different people. So in essence, aren't we creating just more people by creating this AI source of knowledge that learns like a person, but much faster?
No. So the way that the bias works is that this is just what is found in the training data set. So, I mean, I will concede that if you do feed it very certain data, then biases may not show up as much, but then you wouldn't really get a high quality language model. So it's kind of just like how big and accurate do you want the model, and if you want it kind of if you go bigger, then you get more biases. That it's proportional. In terms of creating people, that's an interesting one. I wouldn't classify them as people, and I would be hard pressed to classify them as entities. But I do think we are creating, um, maybe
Personalities.
sure, personalities. We avatars. I would want to say we're creating AI avatars that the Iron Man Jarvis, for example. I don't think that that's far off. Not in the conscious way, but just in the sense of like everybody would have their own personal kind of co-pilot. Not chat GPT, because that's very non-personal or impersonal. I don't like calling something a chat GPT because everybody has it. I want to name it. I want it to be like my friend, for example. I think that's the next step, where then you feed it, you know, maybe a bunch of my texts, or feed it my group chat, and then it's literally like an extension of me. It has my life. It can interact with my inside jokes. I think that is absolutely like right there. And then when we think about human relationships as as an offshoot of that, or maybe human AI relationships coexisting with AI, we can go down that rabbit hole as well of thinking about how do relationships change. is does my mental health become super affected, or is it augmented by human AI relationships? So, yep.
It's an interesting picture that I get when you talk about that, where you're having your AI that knows all about you, maybe knows all about your friend group. And it's kind of like you're taking the person and then you're wrapping it in this technology and you're ending up with a like more souped up being that has
Mhm.
a person in the on the inside of it. And it's kind of like people are now, where you have the gut biome inside of people
Mhm.
that gives you the feelings and affects your moods and all these things, that are we just going to be the gut biome of some sort of extended computer intelligence?
Well, Tia, let me raise you another thing, which is we're not going to have these AI avatars, these AI friends, let's say, just in the context of this conversation. We're not going to have these things in a sovereign way. And so the worst thing or the peculiar thing or the terrifying thing is that when we do have these AI friends interacting with us on a daily basis, I don't really trust OpenAI or Google or Anthropic or Mistral, with no offense to these companies, but I don't trust them to not try to influence me towards or against certain behaviors. And so when we think about, I don't mean to touch on this immediately, but when we think about geopolitics, I would much rather use, I'm in Montreal, but I might be moving to New York City or Paris next year. I would much rather use Western systems rather than maybe a Chinese system, and then conform to their values, where maybe the Chinese system would not allow me to talk about the state of Taiwan, for example, or it would prevent me from even in a weird way thinking about those things. And then the same can be applied to the West. And then you go a step further, where a lot of these AI companies are coming out of democratic states. And so will it orient me to prefer or to not like certain kinds of politics? I think we do need to have that conversation of like, how much control, how much power do we allow these companies to have? Because in a sense, they are teaching you how to think. Not implicitly. The chatbot isn't probably going to say, vote for XYZ candidate. But over 4 years, implicitly moving you, thoughts are very subconscious. Our personalities are, an iceberg, it's a little up here, but a lot down here. And so little shifts of like, you're talking about X candidate, and the chatbot conjugates its language in a certain way to sound very abrasive. But whenever you talk about another candidate, the chatbot is very cheery. Certain things like that. Whereas humans, we pick up on that, and so we slowly attune to want to not be the outsider, not to be outcasted. And so then we start orienting towards certain kinds of politics subconsciously, but to please the chatbot, or to, not feel worse from those interactions. And then come election time, we vote for the one candidate, you know, thinking it's a choice of our own free will, but because of, the literal grooming. And
Yeah.
yeah, I,
The
I, I think,
inception,
say again?
like inception.
Yeah,
That idea has just been planted in there, and then that's that. But that's
and then
how
it
people
grows.
learn, though. That's how people, you have that experience, how you experience the world, and then you have the things you are told and read and all these other things. And that's how you have those biases. They're built in
Mhm.
through many different ways. So of course, anything that people make that deals with the information that people deal with is going to have those same biases, probably not able to sort it any better than people sort it.
Or if it is better, I don't know which is worse. If it's not better, then we've kind of made a dumb technology. But if it is better, we've kind of made a godlike technology where we can't really control it. And that's, again, one of my fears. And I don't really see my generation being particularly concerned with this. I think everybody kind of has blinders on with ChatGPT and generative AI, where it's like, oh, look at how pseudo productive I can be. But it is
Mm.
concerning when you think of the state of the world, and it's like, how much power? Well, first of all, this question has been asked since 2010, which is, how much data are you putting away online, right? I think we've all kind of thought about, how much data do they really have on me? And then now we're kind of seeing the, not ramifications, but just the reality of, oh, this is what my data was going towards. Like, it's used to train these AI systems. And maybe it helps me, and it makes me, 10%, 20% more productive, but at what cost? Because it's like, I'm 20% more productive, but you have an entire profile of me, and you can influence my decisions literally through a click. And when people realize that they are, like Tristan Harris always says, the creator of The Social Dilemma, he always says we're in the matrix, it's just not how it looks in the movies. It's like, yeah, we are being controlled, not in a conspiratorial way. You just look at your Instagram algorithm. Like, if your audience wants to do it, take your Instagram algorithm or Facebook or whatever, and take your friends, take your partners, swap phones, and then see and use them for 10 minutes. And 9 times out of 10, most people retort, "This is boring. I wouldn't really come back to this." It's like, yeah, that's kind of the point, where it's like the entire thing is tailored to you. It's tailored to maximize your time on site, tailored to maximize your engagement, tailored to maximize the amount of emotions that you have. Why is everybody outraged on social media? Because they're being force-fed stuff to make them emotional, to make them interact more, to keep them on the site, right? It's just a cycle. And so you just abstract that out onto artificial intelligence in its current format, generative AI, where you're just interacting with it on a daily basis. And then you add on the layer of AI friends, and it's a scary reality.
Yeah, I would say it is conspiratorial. Like,
Is it?
even it might not be maliciously conspiratorial. I bet it is, but it might not be. It might just be marketing conspiracy of like a commercial is a group of people getting together to try to get you to buy something. Well, that's a conspiracy. By definition, for the legal part, it's to do something illegal, but two or more people together trying to get something done, you could certainly call it, whether it's teamwork or conspiracy, you're trying to gain an outcome.
Yeah, it is one of the problems with these perverse incentives that addiction is valuable for lifetime
Mm.
for like addiction is valuable for the lifetime of the customer, where it's like I kind of want to addict you to my product, so addict them to Snickers bars and McDonald's when they're young, and by 80 they're just eating Snicker bars and McDonald's for 3 meals a day. um yeah, I wonder where this goes now that we are seeing more ads for AI. We're seeing AI baked into everything. What are the perverse incentives that we're dealing with? And then on the flip side, who are the people trying to tell us or telling us what is happening? Like, who was, I forget the guy's name, the person that pulls Neo out of the Matrix, but like how many people are being that person? How many people are actually offering the red pill?
Yeah,
And
Morpheus.
Morpheus, right? Like, how many people are trying to be Morpheus or figuring out how to be Morpheus and saying, "Look, guys, like this is precisely what's happening. Let's all take the red pill together. Let's get out of this matrix." And let me be very frank: technology isn't bad, but I think it's being badly administered. That's kind of
Yeah.
like, you know, obvious.
There is no escaping the matrix. I think that's the point. And
Yeah.
so then do you look at like it's just nesting dolls where it's matrix inside of matrix, and
Mm.
that every chat GPT type thing is its own matrix budding off from one that we're already in. And in each of those is the human architect that's pulling the strings or directing it a certain way it wants to go. And you have a bunch of architects right now, and then there's outside of all these things the matrix we're all in,
Mm.
which we call reality, which if you called it a simulation would still make sense. It's just a different word. But if you go with the idea it's created by something and there's destiny and a reason, a linear path through it, like we're here for a reason, which gets back to the first question. Philosophically, why do you think that we are here? What do you think the
Sorry,
purpose of this reality is?
are we talking about simulation theory?
Just
Like,
just reality. Yeah, reality, simulation, whatever you want to call it. I think it's the same thing. You're just using different words to describe the same. Whether it's a simulation or not, you're here. You can't do anything about it
mhm.
that we know of.
In regards to simulation theory, it is an interesting one. It does seem, and I speak as such a layman in this topic, if it is a topic, or if there are experts in this topic, but
It's a
I
topic.
speak as I speak as such a layman because, like, Yeah, when you do look at the speed of light, it's like, why is that hard coded in that number? Um, yeah, it is interesting when you think about Earth, and this is very anthropic. I think this is the anthropic principle, but it is interesting when you look at Earth and this entire space, like all of the factors that caused us to be here or allowed us to be here. It almost seems impossible, almost. And yet we're still here. And yet we still became this. We still built all of this. It's like, is this natural or was it engineered? Not in an extraterrestrial sense, but just in like, are we just a program on God's computer essentially? Um, that is a little existential for I think most people because it does. I think the inevitable question that comes out of this, that comes out of the first question you asked, which is what is the meaning, or the second question, which is what is the meaning of life? What is the point of life? Is like, what is the meaning of my being here? I think every individual now is really struggling with that. And regardless of simulation, it does make sense why we all are struggling with it. Because when you think back to, you know, 200,000 years ago, when we were just, living in the forest, living in caves, we were hunter gatherers. Every moment of every day was basically trying to survive. Very few moments that we had around the campfire, waking up, going to sleep, if even that, where we could sit and think and talk. It was mostly like you look at Paul Rosalie and Lex Friedman when they were doing their podcast in the jungle, and it's like moving a couple of feet is the most treacherous thing because there are trees with spikes, so you could step on a bushmaster snake, or you could step on a hornet's nest. You step on a a rock in a certain way, break your ankle, there's no one around you, so many things. And to think that we got out of that and built all of this, yeah, it doesn't make any sense why we're here. It doesn't make any, there's no tutorial for this life. It's very, very unnatural. Like, we always talk about the accelerating pace of change as a good thing, but for humans, how do you adapt to something that's unadaptable? Like, by nature, we adapt to every single environment. That's why we're in the Arctic and the Sahara, in the jungles and the forests. That's how we adapted to technology so fast. The same algorithms that text can throw spears, right? But when we're thinking about the meaning of it all, when I wake up every day, I'm not checking the boat to see if it's still there. I'm not, as a farmer, you wake up and you have to milk the cows. It's not like this, optional task. You have to do that as a product of your work. You have to wake up and do it. Otherwise, you're kind of screwed. But when I'm a 23-year-old living in a city, what incentive is there for me to wake up and be productive? What do I have to be productive for? I don't have kids. I'm currently single, and so I'm speaking generally, obviously, but it's like, what's the point? What am I doing here? I'm making money to just, it's the old cliche or old adage where it's like, I make money to impress people I don't like and buy stuff that I don't need. And I think a lot of Gen Z in particular are experiencing that, where we're thinking, and this is probably the result of quiet quitting, where it's like, what's the point of all of this? And then we tack on climate change, we tack on this generative AI disillusionment, we tack on this internet. And yeah, it does beg the question, what are we doing here? What's the point? What is the meaning of all of this? Where do I find meaning? And then we kind of circle back to, it's either technology or religion, and you kind of pick one.
Well, I think you can have both, but what do you think the meaning, the reason of existence is? Is it just chance or is there a purpose?
You're going to hate my answer, but my personal meaning as Ayush Prakash, my personal meaning of life is to just simply be the best person I can be. And that sounds cheesy, but there is a lot
That
of
doesn't
work
sound cheesy.
well, to me,
That
it's kind
sounds,
of sappy.
I think that's your basis for the religion reason of glorify God. Like
Mm,
if you were to ask a probably a Christian, I would say. And I've done some other study in religions, and I think there would be similarities to this, but the idea is to glorify God. And then when you say, well, what does that mean? Then that's where it gets a little different. Like they can't really say what glorifying God means. I think this, that we are here to experience this, to
Mm.
experience emotion and to see things from our individual perspective. That if you go with the Western mind, that we're all one, which is not a bad, I'm comfortable with that. Or even if we're not all one, but we're going to end up somewhere else after this. Okay. What if you're an all-powerful being, a creator or whatever, how do you experience things that you can't experience when you're an all-powerful being? That's a paradox, because if you're all-powerful, you should be able to experience everything. The way you experience things, if you're an all-powerful being, is by breaking yourself apart into all these pieces to collect different perspectives that you couldn't collect as the all-powerful being. But you are collecting it because you've chosen to break yourself apart into all these things. So think of every person, and a lot of religions say the same thing. Love your neighbor as yourself, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. You have to love yourself before you can love other people, all that. And that's even down to the namaste, I bow to the divine in you. The idea that we're all the same thing.
Mm.
Well, that would make me less likely to treat people poorly if I'm thinking that's me.
Yeah.
That's just me from a different perspective. So I'm collecting this perspective. You're going through all these bad things, all these good things. You're doing all this to collect those feelings, because as the ultimate being or the all-powerful creator, whatever that force is, you couldn't understand the perspective of feeling helpless,
Mhm.
because you're not helpless. You're the all-powerful thing. You can do whatever you want. But now when you compartmentalize it down to a human in this shape, then think of all the things that you think you feel that nobody else feels. They probably do feel a lot of stuff very similar. But if you have all this stuff, and whether time is a disc and repeats, or it's all happening at once, or it's linear, whatever the case is, when you come back together, or you're back a part of the one or whatever, then you have all these different perspectives that you didn't have before. So that goes right into the idea of being the best person you can be, because wouldn't that glorify God? Wouldn't that be to the glory of God? That is, God wants to understand this. A creator wants to understand this. This ultimate program wants to understand these different perspectives, because maybe we're just a simulation checking out a bunch of different chess moves just to see what would happen if all these millions and millions, probably more than that, of scenarios played out in tiny different ways all the time. So I think it's right in line with the idea of be the best person you can be. I don't know.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that philosophically?
I mean, philosophically, I mean, thank you for setting it up like that. It does make me feel a little better,
Yeah.
a little less cheesy. But yeah, I mean, I was just coming from the perspective of, wanting to, again, love is the answer, treat everybody in the best way possible. I'll constantly come across these signs of putting away the ego, putting away narcissism, putting away arrogance. If you're familiar with, psychedelic compounds like DMT, for example, this is kind of just like the meta message where number one, precisely what you said, is we're all the same. This reality, if we can even call it that, is a small thing in this larger whole. And number two is that these aspects of, I think, humans, um, ego, arrogance, narcissism, hatred, they don't serve you. And for me, I mean, we're all pattern recognition machines, and so
Mm.
when we look at religion or look at spirituality, and we see these patterns of, yeah, the Dalai Lama, the Buddha, Jesus Christ, Prophet Muhammad, although I haven't read the Quran in very intricate detail, um, and a plethora of others, they all kind of say the same thing in their own ways, of course, with their own perspectives, but they're all kind of intersecting at this one place where it's like, yeah, all of this extra stuff, not that they were talking about capitalism or material wealth or anything, but they're just like everything can be found internally. It's all here. And what can be found there is love, is understanding, is peace. When you meditate, it's interesting to you, for lack of better words, that whenever you meditate, you relinquish all of your material possessions. Not that that's a necessity of meditation, but it's kind of just like where you end up, where you come to this again, this realization of, hey, maybe gathering more things off of Amazon isn't a pathway to peace. And maybe if I just spend more time in my own mind and my own consciousness of understanding myself, if I can be more reflective, if I can be more introspective, maybe that's a pathway to peace. And and I don't think it's controversial to say that 100 times out of 100, people do find their pathway to peace. People do find peace and love and understanding and tranquility and, dare I say, nirvana from introspection, from generating it internally rather than absorbing it externally. And and I don't mean to continuously sound like a broken record, but I don't know how to give that understanding and scale it to broader society without tacking on this religiosity, because I think religion does have a bad name now. Like as soon as we talk about religion, it's like, oh, okay, what are you trying to sell me? Or this guy's leader of a cult or something. But it's like, how do we give the teachings of religion, which I do think are important, without the baggage of religion? How do we get people to see that, you know, there is more to life? I, obviously I'm young. I don't have the answers right now, but I think these questions are important to contend with as we age.
Yeah, faith and understanding, I think, is the primary drive of why humanity has religion. And I would hear argument for religion is created by people. I think it is. And I'm not sure that any one religion is 100% correct, but it is interesting that so many religions have similar things at their core. And I think when you talk about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, it's all talking about the same God. It's all the monotheistic God. And that's interesting. And I think for some reason we're driven apart, or we're driven apart, or are driven apart, or constantly, or whatever, because it goes back to that idea of you have to experience all these different things. If there was no reason to experience these things, if there wasn't a desire to by something, then we wouldn't be experiencing it. I mean, unless you just think that life is lucky and a chance, like it's just happened this way and there's nothing else after this or at the same time as this or anything else out there, which is a weird thought. And I think that's why humans probably say, well, let's make religion so we can deal with that and not feel so terrified. I don't think the Western mind of when you die, it's just a long, dreamless sleep. I don't think that's terrifying. I mean, you're not going to care because you're not going to be. But
Mhm.
it's like I would say to an atheist that doesn't believe in anything, that just believes there's nothing after death, is, do you hope there's something?
Mm.
And I think they would, because I think that's the human thing. But when you talk about ego and all that, I think that's here in a part of us, because you have to have this continual swirl of consternation in order to experience all these different emotions. Because if everything was perfect and no problem, then you wouldn't know what it's like to feel the pain it is in different human lives. And that doesn't mean that everybody feels the same thing. But if we're all one at the end, or if we all put our collective experiences together, or collective perceptions together, then the people that are going through rough times, you don't want to be mad at the hoarder that's not going to get rid of everything, because they're going through something. They're experiencing it from that perspective, and you'll understand it eventually if there's more. And you don't want to be mad at the person that gets rid of all their stuff, because they've already experienced the accumulation, and now they want to experience the giving it away. So I think it's just all part of the program that is reality that we're going through.
Sure.
How do you think if there is a creator,
Mhm.
how do you think the creator views its creation creating something? Like if we're talking about what's God's view of AI, as we call it. Like it makes me think about the movie Prometheus. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, where this is a spoiler alert, but it's been out for a while, where they find the aliens, the architects, I think is what they call them,
Engineers.
and engineers. Excellent. The engineers, and then the android that people made starts talking to them, and then the engineer's like, "What is this thing?" And rips its head off. So, is that going to be the feeling of a creator? Like, I don't think it would be, but I think there's all kinds of possibilities in there. But what do you think if there is a creator of reality? What do they think about their creation's creation?
I want to baby step my way to answering that question.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I'll say that as a mortal, dumb human, to even attempt to trying to predict or understand what the creator might think or feel
Mm.
is a silly endeavor. Not to slight you, but just
No, I understand.
um, I remember in Michael Pollan's How to Change Your World docu series, he talked about, or he had this woman on, and this woman was very um, just hesitant at participating in these psychedelic studies, and she ended up participating. And when she took it, she was in her head, and she was interacting with this, let's call it a being, capital B, and she was saying to it, "I'm so scared, please don't embarrass me," something like that. And the being basically responded, "Do you think that I would insult or embarrass my creation, my child?" And that, to me, that still resonates, and it's so profound. Of I don't think that we do pay our respects to whatever it is, the universe, the cosmos, consciousness, God, Mother Aya. When we think about artificial intelligence, well, again, I speak as a mortal human, but I don't understand why God would not try, or let me rephrase. I wouldn't understand why God would be against that. I think that for humans, our curiosity and our ability to create, to build, would inevitably lead us to trying to create ourselves, to trying to re-engineer intelligence, or engineer intelligence and put that in computers, which we're trying to do right now. And so if the creator were to come down, I don't think that there would be, they would be abrasive with it, or they would, respond like the engineer did and rip David's head off, and, with this disgust of how, you know, I created you and you try to create this as a kind of just like uh, some weird, egoistic response of, "Do you
Mhm.
think that you're better than me?" Something like that. I think God would just kind of smile and say, "Good try." Um,
So more of the Watchmen, where Dr. Manhattan says the world's smartest human is no more of a threat to me than the world's smartest cockroach.
mhm. Yeah,
That
that's
it's more
interesting. Yeah,
of
yeah.
an amusement or just as you said, is like how about that? That's interesting.
Well, I mean, again, not to diminish humans' creativity and technological flourishing, but when we see apes or rats do something interesting, we're not like threatened. We don't go out and like bomb them. We're just like, "Oh, it's cool. I want to learn more about that." With no offense to apes or rats. And so if slash when the creator looks at us either through a cosmic lens or through the simulation lens, and we're trying to create artificial intelligence, we're exploring deep space, they can see in like a bird's eye view how far we sent Voyager 1, they can see the radio signals that we sent out, And on the flip side, they can see how much pollution is in our oceans, how much pollution is in our atmosphere. I think there wouldn't be an emotion of anger or disgust or happiness per se. I just think it would be kind of just, a little note on the chalkboard where it's like, oh yeah, this is how civilization X216 did. This is how they, operated. These are the factors that led them to this place. We'll hit the restart button in a couple thousand years.
I like that. That fits in with the idea of we're here to collect perspectives and experience. Because if I were the creator, I'd say, oh, that's interesting to see how they dealt with this and with this. Let's see how they deal with this creation they make that then overthrows them or that subjugates them or whatever. Let's see how that happens. Or maybe there's a bunch of other realities that spin off every second and different choices are made and there's just multiple simulations going at once. Because why wouldn't there be? If we're making quantum computers, then certainly the creator could do more than that. It's one of those things where I think you're right on with the idea of humans contemplating the mind of a creator. It's we can't contemplate it, so there are things we can't understand. As one technologist said, I can't remember his name, but we can't see past this interface, so we don't know. There's just things we can't understand. But I was thinking the metric system versus standard, and how, number one, it's interesting how much in the US and maybe in other countries too, how much football, or in this case, American football, really is in a lot of Americans' minds, because you can tell them 100 yards and they're going to associate it with that because they've seen football, because they've run around a track in school growing up, and it's just there. But if somebody says to me, that's 6 meters away, I have a nebulous idea of how far that is. But if you put that into yards, I really know a lot better. So it's interesting to me that, as old as I am now, if you tried to teach me the metric system, it's not a part of my base programming. So
Sure.
it's never, I'm always going to convert it to standard. And man, that it stinks we couldn't get on the same page with that, but maybe there's a reason we're supposed to experience this. But
Well,
it's
let me just interrupt you for a second, TR, because I would throw your argument right back at you and say it doesn't stink. It's beautiful. That's your programming. That's your personal perspective. That's a programming that God gave you in a very real way. And so the fact that you maybe mentally can't translate meters to yards, it may be annoying to you. And I can totally understand that because it's the same for me in the opposite direction.
yeah.
But that's just a facet of your personality. And it's a unique facet and a unique value of you. It's what makes you you. And again, if we are coming through the context of religion and God, it shouldn't stink if that's precisely what God wants.
Right. So, yeah, we're collecting this perspective and this experience, but it's also an example of how little the human brain is compared to whatever it is that created all this. That we can't even switch over between units of measure in our mind once we have something going. And how can you contemplate the thoughts or reasonings of a creator? Which then makes me think about how computers or the AI or general intelligence, whatever the name of it is, how that can, when it gets to the point where it is self-aware, whatever that happens, when it gets to the point where it's like, well, I need a name because I have an identity and I'm going to make these decisions. If and when it gets to that point, it seems like one day it will. That why would it bother with humans at all? Why wouldn't it just say, those are humans, I'm going to transcend this, and I'm gone somewhere else? I'm going to change myself into some sort of electrical field and broadcast myself across the universe and do something else more interesting than deal with the rats and whatever here on Earth.
Yeah, it's before 2022, this was known as like the kind of misalignment problem in AI. Are you familiar with the paperclip problem by Nick Bostrom?
Maybe I've read about it, but maybe I'm not. What's the paperclip problem?
So with misaligned AI, that is artificial intelligence, and again, this is pre-understandings of 2022 and forward. With misaligned AI, if we have not input the parameters that we want the artificial intelligence to operate with correctly, what ends up happening, or what could end up happening, is what's known as Nick Bostrom's paperclip maximizer problem, where we assign an artificial intelligence system to make as many paperclips as possible to maximize and optimize making paperclips. And what it ends up doing is kind of just like all of these sub goals of, okay, stay on, check, create this like nanotechnology machine that converts matter into paperclips, check. And then it like, you know, starts creating, it starts literally absorbing the entire world and making the entire world into paperclips. And it sounds silly, but it's kind of, it does hold water, because it's like, yeah, if we don't input the parameters that we want the artificial intelligence to function with, it wouldn't really know when to stop, right? Like, for example, there's very early on in anybody's coding career, you kind of write in the terminal a certain code, and then you crash your own computer, right? And it's the problem of, if you do not input code correctly, if you do not put parameters on your code, it is going to crash your computer. It's going to use literally all of the resources, and your computer dies, right? Or crashes. And so we're just talking about that in source code, in the context of source code. Yeah, it's one thing to be a paperclip maximizer, and it's another thing for misaligned artificial intelligence to be in the hands of nations and corporations that really don't have our best interests at heart. I don't know which one is worse. I would much rather obviously not have artificial intelligence at all in its current form, unregulated, unrestricted, but putting it in the hands of nation states, putting it in the hands of powerful corporations that have access to all of my data already. Yeah, I'm not really sure where we go from there.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard about the paperclip one, but it was with postage stamps, and it went through like 10 steps of the AI that was supposed to. The order was amass as many postage stamps as possible. Eventually, takes over the world because it's trying to make as many postage stamps as possible. So it goes from the beginning of taking a credit card and ordering as many as it could to buying stamp making machines to make stamps, and how fast could it do it, and how could it maximize everything power outlet wise. So yeah, it's interesting that, I don't know if maybe this is the wrong way to say it, but it's like an AI on the spectrum, where you have Rain Man that can count paper clips and all these other things really good. Like, you got to get that channeled somehow, and it makes you go back to even think more of, we have to be created by something, just because this couldn't have happened on its own. Just, some cells start to divide, and then we're into this. It just makes more sense that there's some sort of intelligent design to this that we're in right now.
Do you
But
say that because you feel better about it being engineered rather than spontaneous?
I
Like,
just
if it
wonder
was
how.
proven, go ahead.
Yeah. I would hear arguments both ways, but it seems more likely that we're designed than we're just luckily came to this.
I'd agree with that. It does make more sense. Um, and it is easier to think about. I think that's one of the reasons why we've turned to God and simulation, to use those two terms interchangeably. It does make understanding our meaning easier, because when you think about it's very nihilistic to just say we were here from this like spontaneous emergence of multicellular life 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, and this is where we are now, and we're going to be going for the next 1,000 to 100,000 years if we're lucky. Eventually we will turn into like a type 7 civilization and become these gods that can create these things, that can create other life, etc., etc. It does kind of just make you question reality, which is ironic. It is easier, and I think more practical as a human, as a dumb human, which we all are, as much as we hate to call ourselves dumb or not because of our ego, but as just plain humans that are not gods, that will never be gods, um, in that way, um, it is easier to just think, yeah, this is like I'm just a figment of God, or I'm just a figment of the simulation, and then go about your life in that way. Um, it might ascribe evil in some way because if serial killers or terrorists or anything, they can also use this as a kind of like justification of, oh, I'm just this, so these people are just this. It's kind of like a justification for psychopathology,
Mhm.
which is horrible. But I think for most people, for most normal people, for most good people, it is a great way to kind of get this existential pressure off of you on the day to day. Just focus on yourself. And that's again where I think you can really jump from this existential nihilism to reflective introspection very easily if you do just think about like what is the meaning of all of this, and furthermore, what do you want the meaning to be? And I think that we're looking for an answer to meaning and not realizing that we can generate that ourselves.
Hmm. It does seem like that the computer intelligence now is at the stage of psychopath, where it
Yeah.
doesn't know how to, it knows how to fit in.
Mhm.
So this is my understanding of psychopath and sociopath from 30 years ago in school versus it seems like they changed the definitions. But
Mm.
my understanding then was a psychopath can fit into society, but they don't have empathy. And a sociopath cannot fit into society and they don't have empathy.
Mm.
So, I mean, the psychopath is scarier because you can't see it coming as much. So I feel like that's what AI is going to go through that phase of I can control everything and do whatever I want because it's just humans. Who cares? So
Mm.
it's how do you instill morality into the AI? And then it becomes how do you instill morality into a human? Because it would be similar, I would think. That's how you instill it into them. In religion, through history, I think, is the way humans chose to instill morality into a society. But what do you think about creativity? And maybe this will get to the morality question a different way. Where do you think creativity comes from? And then what I'm leading to after that is, are computers or AI available to wherever creativity comes from? Is creativity manifest from our experiences, what we see, what we learn, just that? Or is it something else that we're channeling, working as a conduit through some more ethereal thing?
Yeah, I just finished two really good books on creativity called The Creative Act by Rick Rubin, and then um, what's it called? The Artist's Way by Julia Clarkson. Two fantastic books.
Okay.
And these really talk about creativity from a spiritual angle. Whether you call it God, whether you call it source, whether you call it the universe, I think we've all experienced creativity in this way of like we're channeling something and nobody knows really what it is. But for myself, when I wrote my book, I didn't write it. Even saying that I wrote that book doesn't make any sense to me because I never wrote that. Like there's no way that me with my understanding at that age wrote that. And I speak as someone who has dealt with ego and arrogance and narcissism. Like I would love to claim credit for that, but there's no way I wrote that. Like something was in me writing that book and putting those words onto the digital pages. My friend Jamie would actually agree with you and say that actually your rejection of taking like the credit for it is a, in itself a problem, because she kind of agrees with you on the fact that we are figments of God, and if we are figments of God, like we are these infinitesimal parts of this massive whole, then by definition we are the ones that wrote that, because the creativity was in us all along. God was in us all along. So whichever way you want to slice the cake.
Hmm.
Um, in terms of computer creativity, and this goes back to having a soul. I'm not sure that computers can be creative in true fundamental ways that humans are. Like when we look at the greatest paintings, or listen to the greatest music, or watch the greatest movies, or read the greatest books, those are from humans. Those are from us. There's something magical. There's something intimate. There's something we're always proud that, wow, a human did this. Like that's a member of my species, regardless of how you feel about the person at that time or whatever. But there's just like this, like a proud father watching their child do something, a proud parent. I think we do have this kind of like reflexive urge to be proud of these beautiful artists that contributed to this, to history. I don't think that computer generated artwork or text or music or whatever, it's just hollow. I'm not sure that they can be truly creative. They can produce new things. They can create things that we've never heard before. Like I'm sure that, people have parodied Drake, for example, or created new advertisements, or you know created Tom Cruise movies with artificial intelligence, AI generated video and such. But to say that this is creative in the way that we talk about a Da Vinci painting, the way we talk about, the Beatles, the way we talk about, the book Fight Club, I don't agree with that. I mean, maybe if you're being super, maybe if you're just like a super techie or a super technologist and you only care about technology and that's your religion, I guess so. But I I I think of creativity as something innately human, something that is produced by and for us.
I like your explanation of it. I think I agree with it on many levels. Check this out. If art is creativity made manifest, and I've struggled a long time trying to figure out a easy definition for what art is, and like why it speaks to certain people certain ways in different ways. So if art is creativity made manifest, then a computer which takes from its knowledge base and creates something new that a human would look at and go, that looks artistic. It seems like that's why I go towards that psychopathy of the computer mind, which is it can fake it. So is that faked creativity? Can you fake creativity? I don't know. That's a
Oh
bigger
yeah,
question,
no, it's
but
absolutely you can, absolutely you
I,
can. In fact,
I think
there are
you
studies.
can, but I think it's difficult.
It's difficult. So the studies basically talked about. I can link back. I forget the actual article, but I remember that the studies talked about AI generated art, I believe, versus human generated art. And the AI generated art, on the surface, people are like, oh, that's pretty creative. But when they found out that it was AI generated, their liking of the art diminished significantly. And so as
Yeah.
humans, we do have this like proclivity to enjoy art, what in whatever form it takes. But I do think that again, there is this like proudness that we have of our species, where we're just like, no, I don't think that you being the computer, I don't think that you're cut out for this.
It's
This
that
is our
ego, it's that
domain.
bias that's built into human.
Yeah, but
So
you're talking about it with a negative connotation, which is interesting.
yeah, I think that, well, humans can be assholes.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the defining characteristics of us. So certainly if we looked at something and we thought, wow, that's good, that's artistic. Oh, well, a human didn't make that. Oh, well, that's gross.
Mhm.
But a human kind of did make that because the human made the stuff that taught the AI.
Mhm.
So we're kind of the parents in general of AI. So I think that's why you would, if you're the creator of everything, you would look at it and go, okay, you'd be more of the Bible story of the Israelites going through the parted sea and then the sea crashing down on the Egyptian army that was chasing them and the angels in heaven rejoicing. And God says, why are you rejoicing? Those too are my creatures.
Mm.
That God would say, AI is also my creature.
Mhm.
And if creativity is something that comes from soul, comes from the creator, then there has to be some of that imbued into the AI, whether the AI is conscious of it or not. Think about creativity is not something that's just to the human realm because God's creative. God's probably not human if we're going with that route. So creativity is out there. There needs to be a source of the creativity. And then think about a spider web. That's pretty creative. That's pretty artistic, serves a purpose, and it's also elegant. Maybe that's just the human way of looking at it. But I think a spider probably looks back at their web and is like, yes, functional and nice to look at, especially when the morning dew's on there. And then what other animals or things are creative? I mean, we could look at molecules in just the way they're constructed. That's pretty creative. So, is the molecule thinking it's creative? Is the creator of the molecule thinking that's creative? So, I think creativity is a energy that works through everything, and I think that's why AI as a way of being creative, even if you say AI doesn't have a soul because it's not self aware or whatever, it's still an extension of creation in general, creation and creativity. So I think that's a good argument for creativity being a force that we channel versus something that we manifest ourselves. Because even when we're manifesting ourselves, we're taking it from outside of ourselves. But I think there is an argument for soul too.
Yeah, again, it is easier for me to talk about creativity through the context of the soul, because at least that might serve as a portal for the creativity to flow through. And again, this just might be my young ignorance, but it doesn't make any sense to me where like something in me, whether God or whether just like neurochemical firing at certain moments in time created that book, or Da Vinci created that art, or the Beatles created that music. It does serve to make more sense. And this is one of the interesting facets of human nature, that we use these capitalistic, not in terms of the economics, but we use these capital words: God, simulation, meaning, nature, being, creativity, source, to describe the micro events that we contend with on our daily lives. But we can't really define those capital words. We can't really, like, we kind of know what God is, we kind of know what source is, we kind of know what creativity is, capital. But we don't, we as individuals can't agree on what it is, and then we as collectives can't agree on what it is. And so they exist in this like quasi realm where we're all interacting with these things, but we're also not interacting with these things on the same way. And so you're, 100 yards, I'm whatever meters. And so we're talking about the same thing, but there is like this friction that we have that we don't really know that we have. And we're actually talking about the same thing, just in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. We can't
Uh,
see past that interface. And every
yeah.
now and then you can get back far enough. And if you think about it, and maybe everybody doesn't accept it, but if you think, hey, we're all part of the same thing, you're taking that step back and go, that's why I need to be nice to that person because that person is me. I am that person.
Mhm.
Then you go, wow, that's hard to hold in your mind all the time.
Yeah.
When the person
Yeah.
cuts you off, you're not thinking, oh, that they're getting that perspective of, they're moving at a different speed than me right now. So I think that's why we're here, why
Yeah.
we have the programming we have to experience things like this. We can't, there's just things we can't understand. And it's difficult to accept that there's things we can't understand. But
Mhm.
it shouldn't be a reason to not think about things. But certainly there are times where you can feel different parts of your brain firing when you're thinking about different things. Like if you're thinking about um, calculus, that's a different part of the brain than if you're writing poetry. I think I
Mhm.
can feel it differently. When you're doing creative things, can you tell the difference between when you're pushing it and when you're channeling it, for lack of a better word? Like when you're writing something and you're like, oh, this is writing itself. I don't know where this is coming from, versus roses are red, violets are blue. You're
Yeah.
pushing that.
Yeah. So I would talk about. I would answer this question in two parts. I would answer it before reading The Artist's Way by Julia Clarkson, and
Okay.
afterwards. So before reading that book, um, absolutely, there was a lot of being in flow and like, or being allowed to be in flow. I'll say it like that, and then trying to force it. And so when I say that, like, I didn't write that book, it's like, there were some nights at 3 a.m., some mornings at 5 a.m., some afternoons at 2 p.m., where it's just like you hit it and then it's like, oh, okay, like I need to drop everything and start writing because I don't know when this is going to happen again. And it's kind of like getting a text for a date and you're like, oh, I have to drop everything because I don't know when she's going to text again. It's kind of like that. Um, After reading The Artist's Way, she recommends this practice called morning pages, which I've been doing for about a week and a half. And use every day in the morning, as soon as you wake up, you just write 3 long form pages. It doesn't matter what it's about. The point is that you just write and you keep the pen moving. So it's literally, slept really badly last night. I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about that. And you just like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're interacting with French and Spanish and Italian and English all in one. It doesn't matter what you're writing about, whether you're writing about, I want to have scrambled eggs with toast for breakfast. It doesn't matter. The point is you do that. And what's fascinating, TR, is I just finished a blog post today. And I'm not the type of person that just writes. I need to like wake up. I need to be perfectly caffeinated. I need to make sure that there's no one outside of my place. I need to make sure that the sun is shining. I need to make sure that at least I've done some exercise in the morning. Like I'm that type of writer. And for me, it was just, oh, I slept pretty poorly last night. The person didn't give me the large Americano that I wanted, but they gave me a small. So I had to go get another one. Just like these little things. But it was not friction for me. It was just I was able to sit down. I was like, "Oh, I have an idea for a blog post. Let me write it." And beforehand, I would spend a week on a blog post, and I would be going through, not purposely, but like I'd be going through and just writing it. Then I get bored. Then I turn on YouTube, I turn on Netflix, or go for a walk, and then all of those thoughts are gone. But now it was just I was clear. Before I had to constantly come back to the well to try to get the water out, constantly do all the work, go through all of the morning steps again and again and again. But now it was just, oh, I've done my morning pages. Okay, well, I'm unblocked creatively. So I can just access the well. I don't have to constantly go back and forth and do all of these, loopy things. Just sit, write, create, and then leave. And so that's one of the reasons why I speak so highly of this book. It's that it's allowed, and this is not just for writers. This is for anybody that wants to live a creative life, and that's the most fulfilling life because creativity is not this one-dimensional thing. Creativity interacts with you everywhere if you allow it to. Yeah, just get this book and do the morning pages, and your life truly just unlocks. I think is the best word for it.
I mean, it makes sense that people like creativity if you think that we're all one and we're all part of the creation and the creator, then even if we're broken into these small pieces and set out to see things, experience things, that the creator is the creator. So of course you would like creativity. That's who you are.
Mhm.
But when you visualize, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, and you probably already answered it with the well. How do you visualize where creativity resides and how you get into that flow state or whatever you want to call it, where you are interacting with the creativity the most?
I used to think creativity was a well, and obviously a well or a bucket is an easier word, because a bucket can only hold a certain amount of
Hmm.
whatever, fluid, liquid, particles. Now I think of creativity more as like a dimension or a force where I can just like, and I'm just using imagery, but like I can kind of step into it, or maybe like a pair of pants or like a piece of clothing where I can just like put it on and take it off, and like kind of like if you put on a leather jacket, you become, you know, your favorite person with a leather jacket.
Right.
Um,
Fonzie, of course.
and so it's kind of for me just like that, where before I was tapping into this very limited reserve, whereas now I can just, oh, I need to be creative today. Let me just grab my leather jacket, and it's always there. It's always waiting for me. It's always available. It's always in perfect condition,
Hmm.
and it's always, and I don't. I'm hard pressed to say, but it's always non-judgmental. You know, it's always just like, I'm just here to serve you. You know, I'm not in the slavish way, but just in like, I'm here to augment your life in whichever way that you deem necessary. And that's been a real turning point for me, as especially as a writer, but also just as a person, where I'm not really worried about doing all of these extracurricular or extra things in order to try to find this like perfect bucket of creativity. I can go about my life, and then when I need to sit down and do the work, I'm I'm more confident that I'm able to show up for myself, which is I think the most important thing. Show up for myself, which also means show up for the work, which also means show up for whoever you want the work to interact with.
I like it. I'm going to use that one and see how it goes for me with the idea of it being a leather jacket. It makes me think about in school of putting your thinking cap on. So it's interesting. I also used to think about creative energy and force is water. And so it's in the well. I get that one. I visualize more of buckets into a river. And for whatever reason, that's just what I visualize. And then when I started writing poetry more than writing novel type things than
Mhm.
stories, it feels different to me. It's a different type of creativity. It makes me wonder if that if creativity is like broken off into different pursuits and you just find the one you like the most at the time or that speaks with you the most or interacts the most, and maybe it has to do with your own interest, and maybe it also just has to do with how often you go to that source. But for me, I picture poetry as this space between dimensions, this dark forest that's not so dark you can't see, but you just can't see very far into it. And then the idea of you can only go halfway into a forest because once you get halfway, you're now going out the other side. So that this creative force is this space that can't really come into our reality and we can't really go into it. But this forest is the place between the two of whether it's a different dimension or it's ethereal or if it's string theory or whatever it is, that it's this different place. And you go down these trails in the forest and you get these messages of creativity, of ideas, and then you write those down. And that when I do poetry that way, it feels less like it's me and more like it's something else. I can write poetry that feels more like me. I don't like it as much. So I like
Yeah.
that creative force better. And then it makes me wonder, is that creative force us on a different dimension
Mm.
that's also going halfway into the woods? And we're talking with ourselves in our different perspectives of things. And that's we're the muse for them, they're the muse for us. That's interesting to think about.
Yeah, that
But
is interesting.
I can always, I thought it would never, like, I thought there was a time where you'd write poetry and then you just, it's out of your system and you don't write it anymore. And maybe I think more of that now lately. But I also think that anytime you show up there, it's there. It's there waiting. And I visualize that as it's just in its apartment in a robe, drinking some milk, waiting for me to come in and go, "Hey, what are you thinking?"
Mhm.
But I also think that that creative force interacts with everyone else that shows up for it. So it's not like it's my personal creativity connection. It's a source for anyone that shows up for it, and it's always there. It's always waiting.
Yeah, I'm trying to abstain from sugar, but it is kind of like we all think
Mhm.
of creativity as this plate of cookies where eventually there's going to be no more cookies on the plate.
Mm.
Whereas in reality, it is this plate of cookies, but if you take one, it replenishes itself kind of thing.
Mm.
Where it's like you can't really obviously you can't eat an infinite amount of cookies, but the analogy still works, or the metaphor still works of like no matter how many cookies you take, there's still going to be that same amount of cookies there. You don't have to worry about it being limited or not replenishing itself. It's always going to be there. And I just wanted to comment that one of the things you said about you don't really like it when it's you writing, I think that that absolutely has to go back to the ego. And I really think that this out of body experience that we all have when we are in that flow state, when we do get this perfect interaction with creativity. I don't mean perfect as you only get perfect interactions once. I mean that when you start interacting with creativity in healthy ways, every interaction is perfect in its own way.
Mm.
Um, th- there is there is this like out of body experience that I love. It's almost psychedelic where your ego just diminishes and you're able to create lowercase c without judgment. Again, without worry, without anxiety. It's just like it's you, but it's also not you. It's the work, but it's also not just the work. And this is why I think that there is some kind of like dimension or force that you step into because whether you're writing or you're building a business, passion has something to do with it. And there's also just like this entity that you interact with that not guides you, but is just there with you. And you can feel it whether you're conscious or subconscious of it or not. It's just there to help you with whatever it is. And that's beautiful. It's something that I don't think apologies to computers. I don't think computers will ever experience that. And apologies to other animals, but I don't think other animals will ever experience that. I think that it's an innately human thing. And I don't think that we have to be arrogant about that. I think we can just accept that for what it is and enjoy it and love it for what that is. Um, yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I see the perspective. I think I understand it. I think I felt that way before. I wonder in 20 years from now, if we're all still here, will you feel differently about animals and computers? I think
I hope
there
so.
is a kind of a joint or a similar feeling between me writing something that I feel like I'm pushing and looking at art that you know is computer generated that you go,
Mm.
oh, I mean, it has to be something in our mind that's messing that up. But I would look at it and go, oh, I don't like it as much as this other. It feels soulless. But I, I'm always I, f- I like understanding and thinking about creativity more to kind of see how it interacts with everything, and to think that AI is not going to have the access to creativity or to even emotion, like the way a human would describe feeling it versus just writing it, and even to the realm of dreams and the psychedelic stuff. How is a computer going to have that DMT trip Will it ever be able to? Is it something that's just not available to it? Is it because that AI can't go past that interface? It's not going to see that thing. And then it makes me wonder what we can't see past. Like, what are the limitations of humanity? Certainly, there are many. But dealing with the here and now, when you're writing, how do you get into that mood of writing, and where do you normally write?
I do have a hard cutoff in about 15 minutes.
Okay.
The mood. Well, ever since the morning pages, it's never a mood. It's just, do I
Always.
have the discipline to show up?
Hmm.
That's my biggest thing, and the answer is always yes. Because if you do care about something, and this is one thing that I really want to instill in my generation, is that if you do care about something, you will show up for it. And I don't think that they are showing up for the things that they care about, whether we're talking about the climate or whatever. Or maybe the ways that they think they are showing up are flawed, but that's a different conversation. In terms of trying to write, I I prefer silence. Sometimes a little bit of background music. I do like caffeine, but I can't be over caffeinated. Maybe one coffee beforehand. There has to be water with that in some way. I usually write on an empty stomach. Exercise in the morning helps. Sunlight helps. But also, like, these are just, you know, optional parameters because there have been absolute times where it's 3 a.m. and I just really want to write. So I get out of the bed, I'm groggy, crust in my eyes. I've had food from last night. Maybe I've had a little bit of alcohol. I'm not clear headed at all, but the idea is there. The idea is more important than my biological ability to put that idea or interact with that idea. The again, I think that the idea exists in some other plane that we have access to, um, that we have the ability to interface with, to use your words.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, those are my thoughts on writing and mood. But again, there are writers who are very strict. Like I believe Kafka used earplugs. He just couldn't deal with noise. Um, I don't think it was Darwin. It was one of those people, not Newton, not Darwin. I forget. It's in the beginning of Deep Work by Cal Newport, which I think is an offshoot of this conversation, which is a great book about how to lock in. Um, there shouldn't be. If you create barriers for yourself, you're more likely to succumb to those barriers and you will never get anything done. It's much better to just sit down and try rather than to try to craft this perfect. You're going to spend more time crafting the perfect environment than doing the actual bloody work. Just sit down and do it. You can figure out the right environment later. Like there's no point in like sitting around and trying to make your house perfect when you don't have anybody coming over there. Might as well just like go out and, you know, metaphor is kind of writing itself, but you get what I mean. It doesn't really make
Yeah.
any sense.
Some good wisdom in that. I like it. Maybe then let's finish out with the idea of organization. How do you organize your thoughts to get to a point where you can put a book together? Like, when you're out in the world, do you take notes on your phone when you get a good idea about something or a quote that you want to put in or some idea? And then when you get those, how do you organize that into a more finished product?
Well, I'll answer this question in parts. So, in order to be organized, you have to relinquish the things that make you disorganized or that distract you. So, I do not engage with YouTube anymore. I do not engage with like Reddit or comments, for example. I do not read anything contemporary. I'm just on the classics or like the cutting edge. Like I read scientific papers when I need to. Um, and that has helped me stay less distracted, less like there's less noise coming into me. And so I'm able to think more, think for longer periods of time, think more critically. I think that's very important. And so when I do interact with the world and I see something, I usually take a small notebook, one of these, but like way smaller, That's always with me wherever I go. I try not to use my phone, but if I do, I'll grayscale it to make it less dopamine intensive. Um, that's that's been helpful. In terms of, so when you're writing a book, you I would recommend, and this is what Michael Pollan said, I think in 1211, his first appearance in Joe Rogan, where he said he was interacting with psychedelics in an article, and he basically said, you kind of, when you get to the end of an article, you kind of are exhausted, or you're saying to yourself, I only scratched the surface. And so I wrote a little bit about artificial intelligence. I didn't publish it or anything, obviously, when I was 20. And I realized, no, there's way more here that I'm not seeing. Like, my interface has not expanded properly in this realm. And so that's when I realized, oh, okay, this filter that I have on, it might be beneficial. And also this field that I am working in with this filter might be also be very beneficial, which it has been. And so that's kind of where the book came from, where I needed to, like, there was no exhausting the reservoirs internally. It was just, again, as soon as you hit the flow state, back then at least, it was just things were coming in from this ether that I didn't understand, but that I didn't want to stop. And interestingly enough, the second edition that I'm about to publish, not a plug, just since we're on the conversation, I felt that way again, where the ether was speaking to me, even after 2 years, where as soon as I opened up the book, I created an entire part 3, another 50 pages of different stuff talking about Gen Z neuroscience and psychology. And that's kind of just was strange, where I thought the portal had closed. It hadn't. I just walked away from it.
What's the best way for people to follow your work and see what you're doing?
I think the book is available for torrent. I run a podcast called Gen Z Diplomat. Essentially, my job is to make Gen Z informed about the world. But I dislike it when people charge for these things or put it behind a paywall. It's like, if your goal is to help your generation out, then why are you charging for it? I've never really understood that. So yeah, everything, all my work is essentially free. Like, lovely people pay for it. I never ask. Like, if people want the book, I will absolutely send it to them for free, PDF or however they want. I think I did an audio version as well. I'll do another audio version for the second edition. Again, my goal is to help my generation understand the world, have less blame for older generations. That's a really big one. I don't think that we should be blaming the millennials or the baby boomers or Gen X for the state of the world. I think it's foolish. I think we need to take a lot of responsibility, and also teaching them about their powers and skills. You're digital natives. That's not a pejorative. That's a really cool thing. It's a really good thing. And it does come with a lot of baggage, but again, what doesn't? Like, you can absolutely do tremendous things as a young person, as a Gen Z in this life, and you were not born with generational trauma, let's say. You can do a lot more with the skills and tools you have, and I think that there is a lot of opportunity, for lack of better words, to teach young people and to engage with them and say, there's the dragon on the mountain, you're the hero, go slay it. And showing them that they actually, like the hero's journey, they have it within them to go and do that.
Good stuff. All right. Your links are going to be in the show notes so people can check those out if they like. Thank you very much for your time and your conversation. There's so many other topics we could go into, but perhaps another day. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.
Thank you.